Hey everyone and welcome back to another tutorial. In this one we are going to build the Hangman game using Angular. But the fun part is that the techniques that we are going to use in this video are not just applicable in Angular, but you can use the same techniques in React, Vuejs or the framework of your choice. So it's not just about Angular today, it's about how we build an entire game with a lots of logic around there that you are going to enjoy throughout the video. So watch the video till the end and subscribe to the channel if you have not already so you can be notified about the next videos as well. Now without further ado, let's get started. So this is a standard Hangman game, and what happens is that I'm using right now programming languages as the question. So essentially you have to just guess what this is, and you can see all the underlined characters here, and you would start by just pressing one of these buttons, and if you get all of those wrong, or if you have 7 tries, if you get 7 guesses wrong, then this happens. Now you can restart the game and then you might try to find out the language itself. For now, I'm going to quickly cheat and go to the console. I believe I've not removed it yet. Yes, I have not. And here we have this language called Vala or Vela. So I can simply go and say VAL, and you can see that here I got the answer right and I can restart the game now. So this is pretty simple, but there are a lot of things going on from head to toe. So let's begin with the tutorial itself. So for this, we are going to start from scratch. So if you don't have the Angular CLI installed, all you need to do is do npm install -g and then add angular/CLI, which means that it is going to install the Angular CLI globally in your machine. You have to install Node.js before that, and you also have to have the Git installed in your machines. So if you don't have them installed, you can just Google and install those. Once you have also installed the Angular CLI, then all you need to do is just run ng new, and then we are going to name this ng hangman or ng-hangman. And here I'm also going to say that the style is going to be a CSS, or we can just press enter and let it ask questions from us. So the first thing it probably would ask is if we want to use routing, and I'm going to say yes for now because we are going to use some of the things from routing, or actually we are not going to be using routing, so I'm just going to say no here. Then we have SCSS, so we are going to use Sass for styling, which is super awesome. I absolutely love it. So we're going to use SCSS, and now this is going to just install all of the dependencies and initiate our project. All right, so now that everything has installed, I can simply say code ng-hangman, and this should essentially open this whole project into VS Code, where I can now run the application which Angular CLI has created for me. You can go to terminal and click new terminal, and you should be able to see the terminal within the VS Code. And from here, we can just run npm start, which will essentially run ng-serve for us, and our application will now be opened at localhost 4200. So we are going to begin from there. First of all, we are going to just run it, see what comes out of the box, and then we are going to install the fonts from there. So if I open a new tab and go to localhost 4200, let's see what happens. This is the app that we have got out of the box by Angular. Now, first of all, I'm going to include a font, a Google font that I really like. So we are going to use that. As you can see in the final production, the font is super cool and I really want to use that. So what we are going to do is that we are going to Google the font dongle. So dongle, Google font, you can quickly just click on it, and then you just need to select one of those. I would select the regular 400. So you can select it from here. And then I think I don't need the light one, so I can just select this one and copy all of this link from here. So I'm going to go to my code, and here in the HTML, in the index.html, just in the head, I'm just going to paste all of this. And then all we need to do is to also set this style into our application. Now, the thing is that Angular CLI by default comes with, or the Angular application, which is created by default, it already has some styles. So we are going to remove them and provide some of our own styles. So here we are going to say HTML body, we are going to say margin 0, and here padding is also going to be 0. And I'm using the GitHub Copilot, so it's gonna suggest me a lot of things, I think, as we go. We're going to say this is going to be having outline none, so no outline on any elements whatsoever. And also we are going to say font family, and here we are going to say dongle, and here we are going to say sans serif. So now that we have set this, the only thing remaining is to set this style and see this working. Now you see that the styles are still not working. This doesn't look like anything like this. And the reason for that is that we have this index.html in which we also have some styles configured. Not the index.html, but exactly app component HTML. So inside the app component HTML, you see that we have this style tag here, which essentially applies the style to the whole host. So we are going to first remove the font family from here, but you will notice that as we do so, all of the fonts are pretty small. So we are going to increase the size from 14 pixel to 24 pixel. So it looks something like this, right? Now, if I move it lower resolution, you see that it's going to be at 150 pixel. It's going to be identical. So we have now the font being applied. Alright, now what we are going to do is that we are going to essentially remove a couple of things from here. For instance, we do have these SVGs, we don't need SVGs. So we are going to essentially remove all of these styles till the footer actually, or till these SVGs. So I'm going to remove those. These styles are also around cards, so we don't need those as well. So I'm going to remove that as well. We're going to keep the toolbar, but inside the content, we are going to remove everything from the content. So let's just make it empty. So I'm going to empty the entire content. Essentially, the footer is also inside the content. So I'm going to remove that as well. These comments as well. So I think we are good. We do have some styles, but I think we are okay with that. So if I see the application right now, you see that we don't have anything. Now I'm quickly going to go and set the URLs for the Twitter and the YouTube logo. So here you see that we have the Twitter Angular. So I'm going to change this to my Twitter, CodeWithAhsan. So feel free to join that if you have not already. And YouTube is also going to be youtube.com/c CodeWithAhsan without any underscores. Now that we have this, we are going to start implementing the overall application and see how the structure looks like. So first of all, what you need to know is we have a couple of components here. First of all, we have this display where this whole Hangman is being shown. Secondly, we have this particular component which essentially has the question, so it shows the question itself. Third, we have this whole component which shows the keyboard or the keypads, right? So we have all of those things right here. So we are going to begin with the SVG itself, and we are going to first use it and make sure that we are showing it on the right time with the right configuration. Even before that, we also need to see where do we get all of these questions from. So right now, if I go to https://github.com/CodeWithAhsan, where we have this project right now already uploaded. So I'm going to go here and see ng Hangman, and inside here we have source, assets, and here we have languages.json. This is the file essentially that we require, which contains an object which contains the category and also the item. And this has a huge list of all the programming languages that I could find on the internet. So I'm going to just go to the raw and here copy all of those. And now we are just going to go inside our assets, and here we can say languages.json. And we are going to paste this right away. The thing is that this application should support not just this JSON, but any JSON that you can provide it. So for instance, we are going to make it in a way that you can provide this a URL from where it can fetch a similar structured data, which means that it would have a category and items array, and it could then select any particular question from all of these items and show it to the user. So that's what we are going to aim for. Now that we have the JSON here, we are going to start looking at the components themselves. As I said, we have 3 components. One for the display, one for the question itself, and the final one is keyboard. And there will also be another component for just wrapping up all of these components. So let's start by just creating those components. So I'm going to go ahead and create another terminal here, and then we are going to create all of those components. So I'm going to say something like ng-gc, then I'm going to say components. So I'm providing a folder which doesn't exist right now. So we are going to create a folder inside app, which we'll call components, and inside here we are going to say Hangman. So this is the wrapper component. So I'm going to first create this one. Now I'm going to create the display component. So I'm going to say ng-gc, which means ng generate or Angular generate component. I'm going to say components, and here I'm going to say Hangman display. Then I'm going to create another component for the keyboard. And finally, I'm also going to create a component for a question where we'll show the question itself. Now that we have all of those, first, we are going to go ahead and use the Hangman component, which is the wrapper component inside our app component. So right now you see that in the application itself, we don't have anything that is being shown here. So we have to implement that. So we're going to go to our app component, and here we are going to say app Hangman. And as soon as I save this, you will notice that now it says Hangman works, which means that this component is now being used. Now, instead of Hangman works, we actually want the Hangman itself. As you can see that when we make mistakes, then the parts of this Hangman are shown one by one. So we also would have to build this logic where that happens. But by default, we are using an SVG, which essentially has all of this being shown by default. So if I go to gist.github.com, where I have my gist, I have already uploaded this SVG under here. So you can see the Hangman SVG. And all we need to do is just to copy this raw SVG and just use that. So I'm going to open the code here, and then I'm going to just copy this. And then here we are going to go inside the app Hangman, actually inside the Hangman display. And here we are going to paste this SVG. Now this is not going to be shown here because we have just hooked up the Hangman component, not the Hangman display. So what we are going to do now is that we are going to go and say there's going to be an element called Hangman. This is going to be the wrapper component, and inside here we would have app Hangman. display. And once we do this, you see that upon refreshing, we show everything. Now this is the sad guy, this is the happy guy, and we have everything being shown right now. But essentially we have to program it in a way that that doesn't happen. Now just below this display, we can also show the other components. So we are going to show the question component, and below that we are going to use the keyboard component finally. So this is essentially all the structure that we require. So here you see that Hangman question works, Hangman keyboard works. So everything is there. Now the first thing that we need to do is make sure that we show the right component at the right time when we make mistakes, or if we don't make mistakes, then what happens. One of the things to understand is that the data flow of this whole application or the Hangman game is going to flow two ways: from the Hangman component, which is the parent component, to all these child components, all the children components. So here we are going to keep the state, or actually a lot of state, which is shared among these components into the parent, so we can pass them down the tree using inputs. So we are going to create a couple of variables here. First of all, we are going to essentially create one variable for question. So we are going to say the question is going to be of type string. Then we are also going to have another array for questions, which is essentially going to be an array of a string. By default, it's going to be empty itself. Then we are also going to have an array of guesses. And finally, we should also have a string or a variable for category. So when we get this JSON, which is the languages.json, which is this one, we will get the category, so we can show what kind of Hangman application or what kind of thing it is that we have to guess. For instance, you could have a JSON for fruits, and that would also make sense. So for instance, right now I'm just going to save this. Now that we have the variable created, we need to know how do we actually get this JSON. So we're going to create a service for that, and that will help us get that JSON object or the JSON file. So here I'm going to say ng-g, which means Angular generate service, and I'm going to create a services folder, and we are going to say Hangman. So this is going to be called Hangman service. Now in order to work with the Hangman service, we need to make HTTP calls, and in order to do so, we need to add another module into app module. So here I'm going to go inside the imports, and here we are going to add HTTP client module, and we essentially need to import from the Angular common HTTP. So we are going to say Angular, or actually HTTP client module from Angular/common/HTTP, just like this. And now that we have included this module, we can use that in the server itself. So we are going to go inside the service. We're going to say private HTTP client, and we are importing this from Angular common HTTP as well. Now here we are going to say get questions, right? And here we are going to essentially have a path. GitHub Copilot is helping me a lot, but here essentially we need to just return with a get call with whatever path we provide. So by default, let's suppose we have this JSON path that someone could provide, and we could use that JSON path either, or we could use a default path that we also create. So here we are going to have two different things. First of all, we are going to say that, so we are going to say something like assets and languages.json. So here I'm just going to change that with languages.json. And here we are going to just say that this JSON path is going to be default JSON path by default. So it's going to just access that right away in this variable. So we are using JSON path here, right? Now that we have got this function, we can quickly call this inside our Hangman component. So I'm going to go to my Hangman component again here, and in the ng on init, we can simply import this service. So we can say private Hangman service, and here we can say Hangman service, right? Now that we have got the instance here, we can say this dot Hangman service dot get question. So we are retrieving those questions without passing any path, which means that it's just going to JSON, the languages JSON. And once we get those questions, then what we do with them. So I'm just going to say this, and then we got the questions. So we essentially need to just say that this dot questions is going to be the questions themselves. It's not the questions that we get when we get back the JSON. We essentially get two things. We get the category, and we also get the items. So here we need to define that what kind of data we are getting. So here in the get one, we can simply say that here we are going to get a category, and the category is going to be of type string, and then we have items of type string or an array of a string, right? And here then when we get the response, we can say response here, and then here we can say response dot items, and we can also say this dot category equals response dot category itself, right? And then we have this set new question, right? So we can call this set new question or pick new question or whatever. So let's say we say pick new question, and this is what we call when this happens. So we can simply say this dot pick new question, and now only just console.log this dot questions for now. So let's save this and try this out. So now I'm going to go to my inspector, and here you can see that we got an array of 705 programming languages. So if I just refresh, you would see that we make an XHR call to languages.json, which is exactly what we wanted. It gets back the data and then console logs it right here. So you can see that if I just refresh, you would see that whenever the component is initiated, so now it goes ahead and in the ng on init, first it makes the call, then it comes with the response itself, which has category and items, and we assign both of these things to both of the variables that we discussed before. And then here you see that we got console.log this dot questions. Now let's talk about what happens when we pick a new question. So in this case, we just need to pick a new question that we can pass to the inner components. So before that, we are also going to just say there's going to be a reset function. When the game ends, we should be able to just say the guesses are going to be empty again. So there are going to be no guesses at that time. And we are also going to pick a new question. But how do we pick a new question? First of all, we do something like index equals math.floor.random. So we are running a random against this dot questions dot length, which means that we would get all the questions like 705. Then we pick a random number between 0 and 705, and then we floor it. So it's never going to be 705. It's always going to be at max 704. So we get the random index, and then we just use that to pick a question. So we can say this dot question equals to this dot questions random index. So now if I save this, I can just console.log the question itself, and here you would see what happens. So if I now refresh and go to the console, after refreshing, I'm actually going to remove all of the breakpoints. And then if I refresh now, you see we got the value Orwell, right? This is the language that we have picked now. If I refresh now, you see that now we got ZPL. Now we got visual objects. So every time we are getting a new question, which is what we wanted. Now let's talk about what would happen if we guess a letter. In that particular case, we just need to have a function called guess, and then each letter that we guess is going to be a string. And then essentially we just need to do this. I don't think we really need to check if the guess includes the letter. I don't think that should be done because we are going to make sure that the guesses always are unique. But let's keep that for now. I think I'm going to trust GitHub Copilot with this. We also need to make sure that this particular letter, it is a value and it's not something that is null or empty or something like that. So we are going to say if the letter doesn't exist or the guesses array already contains this letter, then we are going to return. Otherwise, we are just going to do a guesses.push letter. I think we are at a pretty good stage now. So let's talk about the SVG itself and how do we control this. So by default, we are just going to show these three things. So this is base 1, base 2, and base 3, maybe base 4 as well, but the other things should not be shown. So I'm going to go to my SVG now and explain what's happening there. So in the Hangman display, we have this SVG, which essentially is all of what we just discussed. And you see that we got the line, which is base 1, base 2, base 3, and base 4. So these are 4 base lines that we have. Now there's also a base 4 longer that I added myself to this one, and we would not be showing it before a certain point, but I don't think it hurts to actually show that. So let me actually think about it. No, we're not going to show it in the beginning, but we are going to show it later on. Now what I can do here is that I can just say something like style, and here I can say display none, and I can do the same for this man as well. So I can do this, and if I refresh, see what happens. Our man or the sad man is gone. Similarly, we have one for the happy guy. So there is this happy guy. So if I put a display none here, you will see that that guy is also gone. Now, what we need to do is that we need to somehow say that when we have certain amount of mistakes, then we start showing some of these values. So I'm going to actually remove the displays from here and now show you what I mean about that. So let's say the user makes the first mistake. In that case, only this face is going to be shown. So that's on one mistake. When we have a second mistake, then this hand shows, let's say, or the body shows, then the left hand, then the right hand, then the left leg, then the right leg. And finally, we are going to actually hang this person. So when I make a mistake, and now you see that there's only one mistake remaining. If I now make another mistake, you see that this person now hangs. You see there is a longer base here. This is the longer base that I was talking about. But when we make mistakes, this is what happens in the end. So what we need to do is that we need to make sure that when we make mistakes or when we start making mistakes, this face is going to be shown when we have certain amounts of mistakes remaining. So let's see how do we cater them. So first of all, we are going to go to the Hangman display count, and here we are going to essentially create a property called max mistakes, and here we are going to say there are only 7 mistakes that one could make. Then we are also going to create a variable called mistakes remaining, and by default we are going to initialize this with maximum mistakes, assign it either here or here. So by default we have 7 mistakes that we can do, but the mistakes remaining are also 7. So as we make mistakes, we are going to minus it or subtract 1 from these mistakes as we go forward. Now comes the part where we are going to essentially take into account when someone makes a mistake. And now we are going to talk about some inputs that we are going to pass down from the Hangman component itself. So we would pass the question and then the guesses, so that display component knows what was the question and how many mistakes we have already done or how many guesses we have already, so we can calculate the mistakes out of it and we can decide what elements to show. So we are going to create 2 inputs for that. One input, or let's actually create the inputs at the very top. I actually like doing that. So we got an input which is guesses, and guesses we already discussed about, they're going to be string, and then there's also going to be an input that is going to be the question itself, and then by default it's going to be an empty string. We are also going to go and add one HTML into the Hangman display component HTML, where we are just going to show the mistakes remaining, and we are also going to style this. So in the SCSS file, I'm just going to go ahead and in the mistakes count clause, I can simply say text align center, and then I'm also going to add an animation that we saw here. So I'm just going to go add that animation. So the class that we are going to use is going to call man bounce, and here we have the animation which is this shimmy, and we have 1 second infinite. It essentially runs in alternate directions, so up and down, and this is a really simple CSS animation. So I'm just going to save this, and now let's talk about what happens when we make a guess. So we are already importing the guesses here and the question here. So what would happen is that whenever we make a guess, it's going to trigger a change in this component. But before that, let's go to the main component, the parent one, where we have this guess method. We don't do anything right here, as you can see, right? This is supposed to pass a letter here, and right now it doesn't do anything. So what we are going to do is that we're going to essentially create a temporary button here. So we are going to say button, and then here we are going to essentially say click me. All right, and then I'm just going to create temporary click function here, and here we are going to add a guess, and then just use the guess method here with the letter itself. Now I'm actually going to create a temporary function. So let's say we call it dummy click. All right, and here we essentially use the guess method. So we could either do that, so we can say dummy click, and then in this dummy click we are going to say something like const key equals prompt. So we are using a prompt right now, so we can take the input ourselves, so enter key, and then here we can say something like guess, and then we pass the key itself there, or this should be essentially this dot guess, and this key is always going to be a string, so we are going to use the string here. And now let's try this out after saving both of the files. So what happens right now is that if I go to my sources and click here and then I click me, you would see that it would ask us for a prompt. So it says, hey, enter key. I say something like A, and I hit OK. So we get the value A here, and then we pass this into this dot guess. It goes inside, and then it pushes this letter into the guesses key. So it forward, and now you see that the guesses array has this A. Now what we need to do is that whenever this array changes in the parent component, which is here, we are in this parent component, which is the Hangman component. The button is in the parent. This display is the child where we have this SVG, right? What we need to do is that we need to trigger a change inside this child view whenever the parent array changes, and the parent array is the guesses array. So whenever we add a new guess, we essentially should be triggering something inside this display function, and we do that by first passing the guesses as an array, which just passes this but doesn't do anything, doesn't give us control over what happens when something changes. So for that we need to do 2 things. First of all, we need to have this guesses passed, so we do it by going to our parent, and on the display here we use the guesses input, and we pass this guesses key. Now don't confuse this guesses with this one. This guesses is essentially the child component's input property. This is the variable name. I could change it to anything else, but this guesses is essentially this property that the parent has. So these are 2 different things. So I'm passing the guesses from parent to the child via the same input name, right? Now that we have this, all we need to do first, save this. Secondly, going inside here and implementing something called onChanges lifecycle, which means that we need to implement a function called ng onChanges, all right? And then we would have simple changes that we get out of here. And what we need to do is that whenever there's a change in the guesses, we need to just do a console log for right now. But we are also essentially in the long run see if someone has made a mistake or not. So first of all, we need to see if the changes, and then we see guesses has a current value, which means that it's not null. It's not the first time that we are running this. Then we also need to see that the array is not similar to the previous one. So first of all, we are also going to check, hey, the current value dot length, and that would make sure that if other inputs change, we are not triggering this condition, but only if the guesses change, then we are looking into this. So we are going to say something like this dot, or actually changes, and then we say, I don't know what GitHub Copilot is doing, but it's probably doing something crazy. So we say guesses dot current value. So we are going to say dot current value not equals to, and then we say changes and guesses dot previous value. All right. And I'm just going to do a console.log here with changes and just using this guesses current value property. So I'm just going to save this and let's see in the console what happens. So I'm going to go to console and refresh. And here you see that we don't have anything right there. So if I say click me, if I hit OK, you see that it doesn't still work. That means we have missed something, or I have some bad condition right here. So we got changes current value dot length not equals to current value and previous value. Yes, that's right. One of the things that I now realize is that since we are using a not equals to comparison, this will not work unless when we add a guess. Right now we are doing a push, which means that we are pushing to the same array, the same questions array, or the same guesses array. And if we push another item to an array, that doesn't change it because the reference is still the same. So instead of this push, what we need to do is that we need to say this dot guesses equals, and then here exactly this. So we say something like guesses is a new array, and then we assign that, and now this should be good. So if I now say A, you see that now we get the log, right? Similarly, if I say S or D, you see that now we got the new array. So every time we are guessing in the child component, this is the Hangman display component, which is the child component. So anytime the input changes from the parent, we essentially log it right now. Now, essentially, you know that we don't care about the previous guesses because every time we make a new guess or put a new character there, for instance, if I restart the game, I'm now talking about, let's say 4, but if I now press H, then H is the keyword that I need to check against. I don't need to check the entire array because that would take too much processing. So what I need to do in this child component is that I need to first create a function. So we need to create a function called check guess, and then this would essentially provide a string here. And then I just need to call this. So I need to say this dot check guess, and here I need to use the last key or the last letter that has been provided to me. So I would say changes guesses current value, and then here I need to say changes guesses current value dot length, but -1, something like this. Exactly. So when I do this, then I'm just finally checking all of that. One of the things that I want to do is that maybe take this into a variable so I don't have to see this, which I am starting to not like. So I can say something like const guesses current value equals, and then I can just get it right here by using guesses, and then remove this as well. And now I can just get it like this. So it's a bit more nice per se. So changes current value, and then we also have this dot length -1. This is much better. And now I'm just gonna console.log the last letter that has been provided to us. So I'm just gonna save this, try this out, and see what happens. So now I'm going to go to console, guess the value D, and now you see only the character D, and now we have to test this against the question itself. So in this function, we need to check two things. One, did we make a mistake? And second, did we get all of the correct guesses, which means that we have won the game. So first of all, we are going to assume that we did not win. So we can have a let here that says did win, and we are going to initiate this with false. Now we are going to check if there was a mistake or not. So we are going to say was guess mistake, right? And then we are going to say letter, and then we are going to check if this was a mistake. Now we are going to say const match equals, and then here we essentially would use this, which is what we wanted. So we are checking, hey, let's say the letter was D, then does this question have the letter D in it, which means that right now, if it's Dylan or Dylan, whatever you want to call it, then that would essentially use this regex to compare that within the question. So it's going to take this D and then compare it within inside. We are using the G and the I here, which means that we are checking globally within the entire string. And we are also using the I flag here, which means case insensitive. So it doesn't matter if it's capital or smaller. It's going to check the letter D against the entire question. Once we have got the question, we can return if the match is true. That means that we did not make a mistake. So we are going to essentially return. Otherwise, we are going to return 1. Now, the reason for that is that we can use this number to subtract the value from this mistakes remaining. By that, I mean that I can simply do here this dot mistakes remaining minus equals to this was guess a mistake letter. Now, what this means is that if there was a match, which means that the guess was right, then we are going to minus 0 from this, right? Which means no negative marking in this case. But if we did not find a match, then we are going to minus 1 from this. So here we can start having a console.log here. So let's say console.log, and then we say this dot mistakes remaining, right? So let's save this and try this out. So I'm going to just refresh this and see what is here. So we have list. So if I can now say L, you would see that the mistakes remaining are 6. If I now click and say I, what would happen in that case? We got 5, which means something is not correct. So here we get the values. Let's see if we have done a mistake. So here I should refresh. It's natural. So I can simply say, let's say N. I click OK. This gets the value letter N inside. Then it goes inside. It goes here. And then it says, hey, let's match this with the question, and we are not passing the question. That's the problem. So we need to pass the question as well from the parent. So I'm going to go to Hangman component, and here I need to say question equals question. Now this can compare against the right variable, and there you go. You see live debugging during a tutorial. So it says reading a current value. Okay, so we have another error, which means that we need to find if there's a variable here. So in the child component where we have this condition, we need to put actually changes dot guesses and then dot current value. So we are going to essentially get that, and then we can get the previous value as well. Here also we can just have this. So actually we don't need that because this is going to be processing already. Now let's save this and try this out. No error on the console. All right, I'm gonna put the breakpoints here. The value is Hugo. And if I press H, you see that it goes inside with the letter H. It compares against the question, which is Hugo. You see the value here now. It's going to find a match. Yes, it found the match as it's an array. And now it's going to return 0 from here, which means that the mistakes remaining was 7 before. And now after this, the mistakes remaining are still 7 because we subtracted 0 from there, right? So you can see that here it's still 7. If I say U, then it's also going to be 7. I'm just going to run past this. I'm going to remove all the breakpoints, play, and now you see it's still 7. But if I say something like A, now you see that now it has decreased. So we are doing it correctly as we wanted, and the mistakes remaining are being shown here as well. Okay. So now that we got this, we can now work on the SVG itself. Now that we've got this, we also need to make one more thing, and that is what happens if we have a successful case. But let's do the Hangman, the failure Hangman before that, because otherwise we would be just talking too much and not doing anything. So I'm going to go to my Hangman display here, and now we're going to start limiting when do we show what line in case of mistakes. So first of all, I'm going to go with the face, and this is the group that we have for the sad man. So here, first of all, we have this path, which is, or actually this base 5, which is the man's face. So we only need to show that when we have the mistakes remaining less than 7. So we could say something like ngIf, and then here we can say mistakes remaining less than equals to 6. So we can do something like this. Now, if I go and check this out, you see that the face is not there. And if I make a mistake now, let's say if I make a mistake like this, you see that the face is there now. So we can use the same logic for all the others. So I'm just going to copy this, and then I'm going to go to the, actually I'm going to go outside this group, and then we are going to implement the same one by one for others. So this is going to be shown when we got less than equals to 5. And we have this path, which is essentially the left arm. So this is going to be 4. Similarly, this is going to be 3. This is going to be 2. And this final one is going to be 1. Let's save this now. So I'm going to now refresh. You see that there's no sad man here, but if I keep going and if I keep doing mistakes, you see that we are drawing this one by one. So we got this guy here, we got this guy here, we got this guy here, one leg, and final leg. So 1, and now this is the final one. So if I had 0 for an example, then this would make it having no mistakes remaining at all, right? Now that we have this, the final thing remaining is that we need to add the swinging animation to this person or the sad person. So we are going to essentially have a class here. So we can say ng class, and then here we can say something like man bounce, or actually we can do it in a better way. We can say class dot man dash bounce, and here we can say mistakes remaining are equals to 0, which means that there are no mistakes available now. So this is OXML. So let's try this out. So I'm going to try 1 character and 2nd character, 3rd character, 4th character, 5th character, 6th. And then finally, if I add 1 more, you now see that this is now hanging, right? And this is what I was talking about. You see that this is not hanging from any rope or something, which is a gap. That's why I created another base for longer in the SVG, which is this one. So this also needs to have the same condition. So I'm just going to use the same condition here and then put it here. But instead of this class, I'm just going to say ng if, and that should be enough. So I'm going to just format this real quick, and then I'm going to go to display component and change this to 0 so we can see it right away. So if I now refresh, you see that it's hanging right now in the case of 0 mistakes remaining. All right. Now we also need to make sure that this success or the happy man is not shown when we have all the mistakes, right? And this should not be shown unless and until we have the success case. One more thing that we also need to do is this happy man should also be animating by default. So we just need to add the class here called man bounce, and this should essentially start this as a happy man. Now you see that both of them are enjoying together. All right, so we need to create another property that we are going to call success. This is going to be Boolean, and this is going to be false by default. And then we also need to just go here and say that this happy man is only going to be shown if we have the case of success. Similarly, the sad man is not going to be shown when we have the case of success. So we are going to go and just put an ngif at the top of the man here. So we can say ngif, and here we can say not success. Now you see that we have this as a failure case, but now if I go to our component and here I say true, then only the success or the happy person is going to be shown. The sad person is not being shown, okay? So I think we're good here in terms of the implementation itself. I'm just going to change this back to this dot max mistakes, which means that now if I refresh, you're going to see that we still show the success because of some weird reason. I'm going to set this to false now. And now we have this as a game itself. So now you see that we got this VVVV. If I go ahead and say W, and then if I keep making the wrong choices, this is how it looks, which exactly looks like what we want, right? So we got this, then we got 2. And finally, if I make another mistake like this, you see that now it's hanging. And this should be like game over at the moment. But what happens when we actually select something correctly and we guess everything right? Then this success should turn to true, and then we should be able to see the success message. So for that, we need to do a couple of things. First of all, after we are checking this guess was a mistake, what we need to check is that is every guess that we have, or essentially let's turn it around. We are going to say, is every character in the question already been guessed? That's how we are going to determine if this is a success case or not. So we are going to essentially run a for loop around the question.length. We can say something like if not, this dot guesses dot find, and here we have the guess itself. And then we are going to say if we are not able to find this, then we just need to say did win equals to false, right? Because by default, we are going to suppose that, hey, we won the game, but we need to go here and say guess dot lowercase or to lowercase is this dot question I dot to lowercase. So I'm just going to save this now and try this out. So I'm going to refresh now. It's Lilypon, maybe use something smaller. So JScript. So we are going to say J. I'm going to remove all those breakpoints. I don't know why it stops still here. Then we got S, then we got C, R, I, and then P, and then I'm going to just say a breakpoint here, and then we got T. Now it comes inside, it will go inside and try to find this. And then the success in this case is going to be, because it would not have come to this place because all of the guesses right now are inside the question. So this is going to mark this as success. And then if I go forward, you see that we got the happy man now. Cool. And we also got the game ended message here. So in this case, we are good. In the case of failure, we are also good. Alright, the only thing remaining is that whenever we have a change of question, we need to reset some variables. We need to make sure that the mistakes remaining are again at max and the success is false by default. So there are just these two variables that we need to fix. These two are inputs, so we don't need to worry about that. So we can simply say something like if, and here we can say that changes and then question and then current value. So if that's the case, then we also need to check if they are different than the previous one. So we are going to say something like this, and then we are going to say something like changes dot question current value not equals to previous value. And if that's the case, then we just need to say this dot mistake remaining max mistakes and also this dot success equals to false. All right, now that we have set this, I think we are good for this component. Now let's talk about the character component itself, where we are going to show all of the characters that are supposed to be guessed. So we are going to go to this Hangman question component, and here first of all inside the TypeScript file we need to define the input because we need to get the question itself. So this is going to be an empty string by default. We are also going to get the guesses because we are going to show the character based on the guesses themselves. So we are going to use the guesses, and finally we are also going to create an array of characters. So this array would essentially have two things, two objects. One thing that we know is we need to show these boxes. So we definitely need a container for all of these. Then we need to decide if we need to show the character or not. So for that we are going to have an object. So this characters array is going to be something like this. So it's going to essentially have this. So it's going to have a value of a string and then Boolean guessed, which is going to be a Boolean, and this is essentially going to be an array. So I can do something like this. So I'm going to copy all of the things from the ng on changes from the Hangman display component to the Hangman question component. And here we also need to implement the on changes lifecycle. So I'm going to do ng on changes, and then here we just need to paste this. Now, what we need to do here when the question changes is that we need to establish these characters. So we can do something like this dot characters equals, and then we can do something like this dot question dot split, and exactly what GitHub Copilot is suggesting me, that we need to split the question with this empty string, which means that each character will be taken out, and then we need to just map that with this. So a value of char, the each character, and then the guess is going to be false. Now for this chunk, we are going to do something different. All we need to do now is take the latest guess and then check in the characters if we should show that character or not. So essentially we are going to do this. We are going to say const character equals, and then we are going to create a new array with this dot guesses, and then we are just going to do a pop, which means that we are not modifying the original array. We are just creating a new array and then taking out the last character. I think we could have done exactly the same thing here as well, where we are taking out the last one. So maybe let's do that there as well. So I'm going to essentially go to here, and then we are just going to pass this value here. But I think what we need to do is that we need to use this guess current value here and then provide the char here. And I think it's also important for us to use this value here, which is changes, guesses, and then current value. Then what we need to do is that we need to check that these characters that we have got. So let's say the question was JavaScript, which means JAVA and all of that. So we need to check all of those characters and essentially return or turn the ones true which have been guessed already. So we can say something like this dot characters equals this dot characters dot map, and then here we are going to say something like map char, and here we can simply say return char by default. But then we are going to say if char dot value dot to lowercase equals, and then we have this char as well. So we can say something like guessed char here instead of char. So if this is equal to this, then we need to return this char and then guess to true. The other ones are going to be exactly the same. Now that we have this, we need to just display this in the end. So we are going to now construct the HTML itself. Now we have just worked on the functionality of it, but now we need to work on the HTML itself. So we're going to start with the top div called characters. Inside we are going to have a character div, and here we are going to run an ng4. So we are going to run ng4, and here we can say let char or char of characters, and then inside here we are going to have a character key, and here we can say if the character has been guessed, then we need to show the character dot name, or it's not the name actually, it's the value. Otherwise we show just the empty string. Okay, or we could also have shown the underscore, but I don't think we're going to show that. We are going to use a border bottom instead of that, right? So now if I refresh, there's nothing. And the reason is that we have not guessed anything correctly. So what we need to do is that I'm going to just remove all the breakpoints and we are going to style the characters now. So we're going to go to the Hangman question, and here we are going to say the characters array, which is the characters class, which is the topmost class, is going to have a display of flex. Then it's also going to be having a gap of 8 pixels. We're going to have a justify content of center, or actually we're going to have a space between, and then we are going to have a margin. So margin is going to be 30 pixel auto. And then we need to style these elements, the character elements. So we are going to style those now. So we are going to say character, and here we are going to say padding bottom something like 8 pixel. Then we are going to have a border bottom 1 pixel solid, and then 333. And then we are going to have a min width of, let's say, 20 pixel. And then we are also going to have a min height of 20 pixel. And finally, we are going to have a text align center. Now let's save this and see what happens. Now you see that we got these 3 elements here, and let's see what's on the console. So here we have ADA. Now if I try to guess something, what would happen? So if I say A, hit OK, we got an error, and that says reading current value of this. So that means we have an issue, which is question current value. So we need to put something there as well. So we're going to go to our Hangman display, and here we got question dot current value at this point, and we are also going to see changes here. This also then has to be exactly here as well, otherwise this is also going to cause some problems. So let's try this out again. So we got Erlang. So if I say A, okay, and now we got a tough one. Let's see a simple one. So if I now go ahead and open, and if I say R, let's see what happens. So it comes inside, we got a new guess. So the changes dot guesses dot current value is R. So it's going to pop out the guess character R here. Then it's running the map again, and then if it finds anything inside, it would return true. So here you can see that it came inside, the character is R, and it's running guess true, which means that now it's going to reveal itself here. So I'm going to just play this out, and you see that we got 2 characters being displayed there. Super cool. So I'm going to remove all of those, and that means if I try to get the other ones as well, they would work. So if I say something like P, you see that it also shows them as well. But if I start making mistakes like 2, you see that now we are getting those issues, right? So this component is actually working fine now, because we reveal the characters when we guess the values right, and we don't reveal them when the values are not right. So you can see that they work in both of the cases. And if I guess everything correctly, then our answer would be revealed, and this would be a happy person. So I'm just going to say prog, and then finally it's, I think, APH. So A, and then it's H. So now we got a happy person and the game ended. Super cool. All right, so the final thing remaining is actually this keyboard input. And as you can see, we have some hard-coded values here, but we are also going to see some things dynamically. So we're going to start with a constant file. So I'm going to actually close all of these and kind of collapse all of these. So we are going to create a new folder, call it constants. And inside we are going to have a file called keyCharacters.ts, and this is going to be the content of that file. So notice that it is just a string of a lot of numbers and some characters, and essentially some special characters as well. Although this doesn't cover all of the characters possible out there, some of the questions could have some different characters which are not covered here, but we are going to handle that as well. For now, we are going to focus on the key characters itself. So first of all, what we need to do is that we need to essentially go to our Hangman component, and here we're going to pass the question itself. And the reason for that is that whenever we have a change in the question, we essentially need to tell this keyboard so it resets itself, because otherwise whenever we start guessing, we are going to disable the buttons, right? And when there's a new question, then we need to re-enable them somehow. We are going to pass the question, which means that this keyboard essentially should have an input. So here I'm going to say input question. So it's going to be question, and here it's going to be an empty string right now. So I'm going to import this input from Angular core. And now let's talk about the key characters. So we are also going to call this. So for the key characters or the keyboard buttons, what we need is something like the question one, essentially some sort of interface which has 2 things. So we are going to call this interface ikey, and here we have 2 things. We have a value that is going to be string, and then we have guessed, and then we have a boolean here, right? So essentially, we are going to have a variable called keys, which is going to be just like this. So we are saying that keys is an array of objects, and each object has a value, which is going to be the character itself. And we are going to store a state of whether it has been used already or not. Because if you go to the app right now, and if there's a name that has something as duplicates like 2001, if I just try 0, you see that both of these zeros are now available, which means that I don't have to guess 0 twice. So that's why we are going to mark them as guessed. Now all we need to do is to assign these keys from the key characters. Here you see that we have a string value here, but essentially we need to generate the key characters right here. So we can do something like in the constructor, we can do this dot keys equals, and then we can say something like the constant name is key chars. So we can say key chars dot, and then we map that, and then we say something like map key, and then here we just return, and then we return the value with key and guessed equals false. Here it says map cannot be used because we need to use a split with an empty string since it's a whole string. And now these keys should be there. Now what we need to do is to implement the HTML of this keyboard. So we are going to go to the HTML file and start with the keyboard element. Inside we are going to have a key element, and we are also going to give this a class of button. We are going to style in a bit, and just above this key button we are going to have another element called keys, and inside that we have the key button. And here we can say something like ng4, and here we can say something like let key of keys. And then here we can simply say key.value and just save this. Now if I go to my app, you can see that we got all of the characters now being shown here, but they do not look like this one. So we need to make them look like that one with CSS right now. One of the things that I also want to do is to have another element here called key char, because we are also going to center that within this button. So this element would essentially help us with that. The only two things that are remaining is that when we have this button click already, or if this has already been used, then we need to add a disabled class to this. So we can do something like class.button disabled, and then we can say something like key.guessed. So if it already has been guessed, then we should not try to do that again. And finally, we also need to have a click handler on this one, which will essentially be called whenever we press this button. So here I'm just going to create a new function. I'm going to call this on key click, and here I'm just going to say key.guess equals to true. For now, I think that's enough. So I'm going to go to my code pack, and here we are just going to go here and then apply the click method. And here we are going to say on key click, and then we just pass the key dot value here. And I think that should be good, or actually the key itself, and that should be good. So I'm just going to save this as well. And now we can see the styles themselves. So we are first going to say keyboard, which is the top level element. We are going to say the max width of this one is about 600 pixel. And that is because when you see this, you don't see this taking the whole width. So it's rather quite small. And then we need to use a display flex, of course, because we need to have them aligned into one row, or essentially a wrapped row. So we are also going to say margin, and then something like 30 pixel auto. And then we are going to style the keys element, so or the element with the class called keys. This is going to essentially have a display of flex, right? So I'm going to save this, and now you see that all of those elements are now into this pattern where they're inside one single line. One thing that I need to do now is to style each button itself. So here you see that each key element is also a button. So I need to use the same button class throughout this application. So I'm going to go and actually add the styles into the styles.css here for the button class. So I'm going to say button. I'm going to first start with the border radius to 4 pixel. Then I'm going to have the minimum width, minimum height, and the background color for this one. Then we are going to also make this color white FFF. So if I just go here, you see that now we got this button, right? One of the things that we need to do is add some sort of gap into the keys. So if I go back to my Hangman keyboard component CS here, we have the display flex, but we also need to add the gap to 10 pixel. Then we need to also say flex wrap is going to be wrap. So if I save now, you see that now we got a similar structure, but still the buttons do not seem to be at the center. So it quite looks like what we want in the end, but not there yet. So we are going to do a justify content center in this case. And if I do that, you will see that we have this justify center. So right now it looks quite similar again, but we also need to make sure that this button's text inside it is also centered. So for that, I'm going to go to style.scss back, and here we're going to start with display flex, and here we say align items, center, and then justify content, center, and then we are also going to say border none. Now, if I refresh, you see that they look exactly the same, right? The things are not at the center. This looks a bit weird, but we are also going to fix that as well. But they look quite the same at this moment. One of the things that you would notice is that if I mouse over on any one of those, you see that the color changes for all of those. So we have to implement that as well. And whenever I select something, you see that their color also changes, right? So we also want that to happen. So first of all, let's implement the hover state. So here we are going to say hover. Whenever we have the hover over it, we essentially would have the background color set to DC, 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 and then we are also essentially going to have a cursor pointer by default. So we have the background here. Actually, this is going to be a disabled background, but this one would just set the opacity to 0.7. And I think that should probably be it. Then we should also add the disabled attribute. So we say disabled, and here we have the background color to DC, 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 and the cursor essentially should not be pointer, but should be default. Let's see what happens when we do this. So if I now press a key, you see that it's now grayed, and the cursor also is not pointer. You see that here it's pointer, but on the disabled one, it's not pointer. However, you can still see that if I mouse over, the hover state is on this one, but also on this one, right? So if I kind of zoom in, you see that now it's kind of hovering still. So what we need to do is that here, instead of just applying this, we can also say that this element should not have a class of button disabled. Then we change the opacity, otherwise we don't. So now in that case, if I select this, now you would see that now there is no hover state. This one has, but this one doesn't. And that is essentially what we wanted. Now let's apply some styles to the Hangman wrapper component to make it look like this. So we need to make this centered somehow. For that, we are going to go to our app, or actually our Hangman component. And inside the CSS file, we are going to add some styles. So we are going to say Hangman, which is essentially here, the class on the top level here. We're going to say this Hangman is going to be a display of flex. It's also going to have max width of 960 pixel. The flex direction here is going to be of column, and we need to have the align items center. So align items are supposed to be center. So if I save this now, see what happens. There you go. So now it looks quite the same, right? We have a button, but the rest of the things look exactly the same. Cool. Now what we need to do is to make sure that when we essentially click this button, then we also guess this value if that's correct. So right now, when we click a button, you see that we do see these mistakes happening on the production one. But right now here, if I just click here, nothing happens because we have not hooked them with the mistakes or with the guesses themselves. So how do we do that? We are essentially going to go to the keyboard here, or the keyboard component here, and then we are going to add an output. So we are going to say output, import that from Angular core, and then we are going to call this key pressed, and this is going to be new event emitter. And then here, essentially what we need to pass is a string, and we are just going to make sure that the event emitter is from Angular core rather than from stream. And now it works. So when we have guessed the key, essentially we need to just emit the same value as well. So first of all, when we click a key, if the key dot guessed was already true, we just need to do a return. Okay, that's the first thing. Otherwise, we mark the key as true, or the guessed value as true. And then we also do this dot key press dot emit, and then we just emit the key value. Now that we have this, we essentially need to capture this into the parent right here from the keyboard. So we can say something like key pressed. And once we do so, we need to call the guess method with the provided key using event. So then we would not need this click me button. So if I now refresh, let's see what value do we have. So we got C++. So I can simply go here and say we got C. So I can press C, and you can see that it guessed the values. But the thing is that, do we have a plus icon here now? And the answer is no. So this is one possibility that we might end up with having not the character, actually we have. So C++, it doesn't work. It says plus, nothing to repeat, new regex, blah, blah, blah. So that means our regex is actually breaking. So what we need to do is we need to go to our regex, or actually inside our display. So we got our letter here. We could either use this regex, or we could use a simple comparison. So a regex is failing here. So instead of the regex, we can probably use a simple comparison. So we can say something like let match found equals to false, or we could say match found equals to true, or actually let's say we say was a mistake false, and then we run a simple for loop. So we say this dot question dot length, and then we essentially say if this dot question I dot to lowercase has the letter to lowercase, then we return 0. Otherwise, we return a 1. So essentially, we can actually remove this as well. And then we have this as well. And then we have this. So we can just remove that. So let's save this and try this out again. So I'm going to say refresh. And if I just press the plus button, it doesn't fail now. I can say Zeno. So Z, and then we got E, and then we got N and O. And now you see that it works perfectly fine. Now, the thing is that there might be some cases where there could be some letters which do not exist in our keyboard, which means that someone could be using some language other than, and they could have Unicode characters or something else as well. So what do we do in that case? So let's suppose we have a situation where we also have the question as Muhammad Ahsan, which is my name. So let's say that whenever we go to pick up a question, let's actually go to the Hangman component, and when we say pick a new question, we simply say something like this dot question equals, and then we have Muhammad Ahsan. So if I save this now, you would see that now we got the question, and I can simply say something like A, and you see that we got all of those found. The thing is that I cannot make a successful attempt at this question because our keyboard does not have the space key, and my name contains a space, which is right here. And this is one example. So how do we go about that? One of the things that we could do is that in the keyboard, we are already getting the question. So we can implement the on changes lifecycle. Here, we can say ng on changes. And then here we can also see that we got only one input, that is question. So we can say something like if. So here you can see that we got the current value and the other checks as well. But essentially what we need to check is if the question has any keys that we don't have. So we can do something like this dot add missing keys, and then we need to create that function. So we can say add missing keys, and then what we need to do is that we can simply say, so we can probably say that the missing keys is we essentially get the question, and then we check each question. So we do have the keys here, but I don't think I'm gonna trust GitHub Copilot here again. So we are going to run it against the question dot length. And then we are going to see if this particular iteration of question or this character exists in the keys or not. So we can say const key exists equals this dot keys dot find, and here we say key, and then we do a return key dot value dot to lowercase, and then we say this dot question dot to lowercase, which means that we are finding it inside question. Okay. Once we do so and we find the key, then we are good, which means that our key can answer the question. So if the key exists, let's say, then we just do continue here. Otherwise, we do this dot keys dot splice, or we could also say push actually. So we say push, and then we say something like the value is going to be the question I, and then the guess is going to be false, right? So guessed is going to be false. So let's save this, refresh this, and now you see at the very end, we got this space, right? But this is also a problem. The problem is that if we have like 5 missing keys, they all are going to be added at the end here, which means that whoever is trying to answer the question can just go ahead and, press the button, and they would immediately see that it's not a mistake. Now, instead of just pushing at the end, what we can do is that we can pick a place between these special characters before 0 and just add right there. So I already know that there are about 11 characters. So 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, actually 12, but from 0 to 7. So I can pick a random index. So I can say const random index equals math.floor and then math.random and then multiply by 11. So we get a random index in this case. We also need to call this as a method. And then I can use the splice method. All right, I can say random index 0 and then this, which means that now if I refresh, the space is at the index 3. If I refresh again, the space is at index 2 or actually index 1. So it is going to jump between all of these indexes somewhere. All right, so I think we got only 2 things remaining. One, when we end the game, we need to provide the reset option. And second, we also need to be able to provide a custom JSON path to load questions. So anyone can use this, right? So if I refresh here now, you will see that. But let's say if I give all of the wrong answers, you see we get this restart game and I click on it and then we can restart it again. So let's build that now. So this reset logic essentially would come from the Hangman display component where we already have a log that says the game ended. So we can say output and then we can call this game finished. And then essentially this is going to be a new event emitter from Angular core. And I think that should be it. So now that we have this, we can just emit this event right from here. So we can say this dot game finished dot emit this dot success. And we can also have this event emitter that this is going to emit Boolean from here. So at this point, when we finish this, we would know if this was a success or not. And now we need to capture this event in the parent component. So we are going to add that right here. So we are going to say game finished and here we need to do something. So the thing that we need to do here is that we need to first create a property which will show that button. So the property we'll call restart game view shown, and that is essentially the button, or actually we can say restart game button shown, right? And then we can initially call this false, but we can also create a function called on game finished, right? And here we can say this dot restart game button shown equals to true. So this is going to make that true, which means that now we can decide when to show that. So first of all, we can say on game finished is the function that is going to be called. All right. So when we click this, or when we click when the game has ended, then this is going to be turned to true. And then we can decide what to show. So the display is always going to be shown. The only thing that would change would be either these question and keyboard would be shown or not be shown. So we are going to essentially wrap these into an ng container. And here we're going to say ng if, and then here we say if not, so we are going to say restart game button shown. If that's the case, then we essentially show both of these or these elements. But if that's not the case, then we do else, and then we have some sort of button that we have. So let's say restart game button. Now we need to have that. So we can say something like an ng template, right? And here we have this template. So we are going to end this template, and this template means that we can give this a variable that we are using here. So if restart button game shown is false, then we show the entire game. But if the button is being shown, then we show this particular template. And here we don't need button primary. This one is calling the reset method, which says restart game, and I think we should be good. You will also notice that here we have when we have everything going wrong or the game ends, we got this restart game with these arrows. Fortunately, you cannot do that in HTML right away. So you can probably just use a string and then you can use something like this, but then you would also have to escape these as well. So if you want to go through all that trouble to do this, that we have that implemented, let's test this out. So here we got Muhammad Ahsan. So I'm gonna just try to do all of the things wrong. And now if I press this, you see that now we got the restart game. Super cool. If I press that, now you see that it says Muhammad Ahsan and it's resetting them again, but it's not changing the view back. And that is because when we reset, we don't set this back to false. So we can say this dot reset equals to false. So it's going to now do that. So I'm going to just go ahead, do all the wrong answers here, about to go right. And now if I restart the game, you see a new question and then it kind of goes on and on. One of the things that I just realized is that the mistakes remaining, they are not refreshed when, or they are actually refreshed when the question is changing. So now since the question didn't change, that's what happens. So let's try this out with a real scenario. So if I'm going to go and refresh, so wrong answers only, restart game, and now you see that they are resetting. So we are good. The final thing remaining is that how do I give this a different JSON to fetch? So in order to do that, we are going to just provide this a URL, and anyone can give a similar structured JSON path here and can utilize that. So let's say we got another JSON inside this assets folder. So let's say we had something like viewers.json, and then here we could say something like a category would be code with Ahsan community. And we are not showing category anywhere. I'm going to fix that. And the items then could be something like Lasif. We got Obed, Nadeem. We also got Hamza, Muhammad, Khan. Who else do we have? We got Rafiq, So let's say we got these 4 people, and if I wanted to just use this JSON, it is very possible right now in the demo app, but I want to do that right now in the implementation itself. So what we'll do here is that we are going to just allow some sort of a URL parameter like JSON path, and then I should be able to say something like assets viewers.json, and then this should essentially do the same thing for me as well. So how do we do that? One of the things that we need to do is we need to go to our app Hangman component, and here we are going to import a service called location. So we are going to say private location, and we are going to say location. We are importing this from Angular common, right? When we have the component initiated, we essentially should get out this URL. So we need to first create a JSON path variable. It's going to be a let. Then we are going to say const URL equals to this dot location dot URL, or actually I think it's path. So when we get this, it essentially would retrieve this part of the URL after the question mark. So we can then say something like if URL dot includes, and here we can say JSON path, then we need to do something. So we then need to say JSON path and then URL dot split, but we are going to split by JSON path, the parameter itself, and then we are going to get the first one. So we are going to get the entire URL path from here, or essentially we also need to say equals, so we only get the path. And once we do so, we are going to pass the JSON path right here in the get question, and our questions already has the ability to take that and pass it. So if I now refresh, what happens? Do you see the name here? Rafiq is here. If I refresh again, now we got Lasif, we got Hamza Mohammad Khan, we got Rafiq. So now we are only going through those JSON files which we have provided the path for here, instead of obviously the language. So if I just go with the normal one, we get the languages JSON. But if I give this a path for a particular JSON, it essentially retrieves that as well. We also have this raw file that I think also I can give a path of. So if I give path of this whole thing, JSON path equals this. And now we got the languages.json from the raw GitHub user content. So this is exactly from GitHub. And now this is also working perfectly fine. Finally, all we need to do is just to push this code to our production where I can actually test this out. So we already have a repository here. What I'm going to do is that I'm just going to copy the link from here, and I'm going to go inside my code, and here I'm just going to push that. So what we need to do here is that we just need to save all of this, and here we can say something like Angular Hangman instead of ng Hangman, and I can add all of the files that we just talked about. I'm just going to see if we have any console logs here. So we got this dot question, which I think is fine for now for anyone to try this out. You might want to disable that when you're publishing that like for real users. So I'm just going to add everything, and then I'm just going to push this. So let's quickly do that. So I'm going to say git add, and then I can say commit, and then we can simply say something like ng Hangman final files. All right. And then I can rename the branch. So I can say git branch m main, git remote, add origin, and then this, and then I can simply say git push f, and I need to do this with f. So we are pushing this right now into repository. So if I refresh now, you will see that now in the ng Hangman, I just pushed the latest code 26 seconds ago. One of the things that we want to do is to implement Angular CLI GH pages. So I'm just going to Google it right now. So Angular CLI GH pages. And this is a package that you can use easily to deploy your Angular applications to GitHub pages. So what we need to do is that we need to essentially add this into our project by doing ng add Angular CLI GH pages. So I'm just going to go to my terminal and run this. When it asks you that if you want to install this, you just say yes. And finally, we just need to go to package.json and add a new command here. So what we need to do here is that we need to say something like deploy, and here we say something like ng deploy, and here we say base href, and then here we need to provide the repository name. So it's ng Hangman. All right. And then we need to just run this command. Now, one of the things that I'm pretty sure is we also need to make sure that our assets are being shipped when we deploy our application. So here you can see that the assets are included already. So we don't need to worry about that. And now all I need to run is npm run deploy. This should generate the production build for us and also deploy to the GH pages branch, which should make us run this really quick. All right, so you can see that the application is deployed now. So if I now go to this GitHub and if I open my ng Hangman, I can go to inspect and see if it works. You can see that we got this working exactly like this. and you can see that we get this message here with the string message, and I can use all of the functionality that we already talked about. We can fail, we can try out different things, and it's going to show the successful or the failure based on our input. So yeah, that's pretty much about it. I'm just going to push this code so you can try it out. I would highly appreciate it if you can tweet this video with the Angular Hangman game if you found this useful. Share it on your wall, share it with others who can benefit from it as well. I stream on Twitch and YouTube every Wednesday and Saturday, so you can feel free to join in, ask questions about jobs, careers, languages, and you can also code with us as well. If you have not joined the Discord community, you're missing out a lot. Please join. You can also ask questions from there as well. And finally, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to give this a big thumbs up and also subscribe to the channel if you have not already. And as always, happy coding and see this next video before you go.